Thank you for being here. Clearly, your knowledge runs deep.
Well, a lot of years, a lot
Yeah.
of years.
Well, I'd like to start with the theme. The national theme for Black History Month in 2023 is resistance. I wonder if a lot of people realize that there is a national theme for Black History Month every year.
Well, there's an organization that kind of dominates the field called the Association for the Study of African American Life and History. We have a very active branch in Detroit, for example, and each year they pick a theme, and resistance is one theme that I actually focus on when I teach the African American History Survey at Detroit Mercy, because it's crucial to understanding African American history, the African American past, kind of the things that draw many of us to African American history, which is the resilience and survival that African American people have engaged in against some significant oppression over the years.
Yeah, talk about that a little bit. You said resilience. That sounds like a key word. Through the many chapters of Black history, why is the resilience of African Americans such an important topic?
Well, I think for one reason, if you just focus on the oppression, which is substantial, you don't look at African Americans as agents, in their own affairs, agents in fighting against slavery, Jim Crow, and a host of other things. Dick Gregory, who was African American comedian and activist that died just a very few years ago, he grew up in St. Louis, and he said, people look at African American history and they see oppression. We have to understand that we had joys back there in St. Louis. And what he meant by that is we were able to resist, and at the same time, part of that resistance is creating lives for ourselves where even in the midst of oppression, we can enjoy life. We can enjoy ourselves, we can enjoy each other. We could be sustained by family and friends and culture and a whole host of things.
We've started to see that very argument being made in mass media, in pop culture recently, that people will say we need to see more Black joy on television, in movies, so it's not just the gruesome, horrific stories of, through history. Talk about the psychology of that. Why is it important to see Black Americans as fully well-rounded people?
If we just focus on the oppression, which again is important to include, then we don't see African Americans as actors in their own lives. We see them as kind of distant, almost anonymous figures. And the danger of that is then we dehumanize them and look at them, just like happened when slaveholders looked at blacks during the year of slavery, and assumed because blacks were more subtle in the way they fought back at times, because they had to be, to avoid whipping, sale, etc., that somehow that meant that they were less intellectually capable, that they were less emotionally sensitive, etc., etc. And good example of that is Thomas Jefferson, one of the founders of our country, who wrote in his Notes in the State of Virginia an early tome in which he explored his views on African American life and culture. And he argued that white folks had emotions and sensitivities that allowed them to truly love. For Black folks, that was an instinct. It wasn't true emotions. Therefore, in his view, slaveholders were justified, just like my dad, who was a dairy farmer, they were justified in selling and separating Black families, just like my dad would separate at some point a cow from her calf, and think that there was nothing wrong with that. So, to give Black people their due, their full range of emotions, knowledge, and all of that, we need to dig below the oppression and see the whole picture.
Do you think the typical curriculum that is being taught to children these days, grade school on up, do you think it is typically well-rounded? Do you think it's telling those stories as well?
It depends where you are, and that can mean state by state and even school district by school district. It's getting better. When I was growing up, and I grew up down in Ohio in not completely but largely white small town, and I was fortunate to have teachers that brought things into the curriculum. They were younger, they were coming out of college in the 60s and things like this. but things into the curriculum that could give me that fuller picture. But the textbooks, maybe you'd get a mention of anonymous slaves and slavery. After the Civil War, you'd get a mention of Booker T. Washington, and that was about it.
Yeah.
And so, you know, my life has been, since then, has been exploring a lot of that history. Even in college, you know, history textbooks at that point didn't include a lot. It's getting better. It's not there because some states, some locales are very loath, very uncomfortable with telling the full story because somehow they think it's going to provoke white students to feel guilty, uncomfortable. My feeling was, you know, when I was a young man, really a teenager, and encountered some of this stuff for the first time, a little bit of discomfort was a healthy nudge to learning about African American history. So I get a little troubled when I see some of the blowback these days.
Yeah, I would like to talk much more about not only what led you to devote so much of your life, your career, to this study, but also what you just mentioned, the hot button issues that we have seen quite a bit in recent years, in recent days. We're going to talk about that when we come back.
Black History Month is extremely important in my life. Understanding Black history is understanding our legacy and honoring those that paved the way for me to have all of the opportunity that I do today.
CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock in Macomb County. Hi, we're CBS News Detroit, but we don't just cover the news here. We're also here, and everywhere in between. You know, the places you live, work, and play in Southeast Michigan. We're talking less of this, and more of the stories that actually matter to you.
CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock.
That's right, local news just found a home in your neighborhood. We're CBS News Detroit, live, streaming, and on demand. Nice to meet you. CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock in Wayne County. CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock in Monroe County.
CBS News Detroit, the stories you care about.
Live, streaming, and on demand. We're on your block, around the clock.
Southeast Michigan news whenever you want it.
We live here. We work here.
From North Branch to Southgate.
East Point to Westland.
Wherever you live, we're here for you.
Making a difference in your neighborhood.
CBS News Detroit, live, streaming, and on demand. Building a better newscast, one story at a time.
CBS News Detroit, on your block, around the clock in Oakland County.
How would you build the newscast of the future?
Expect the unexpected.
CBS News Detroit.
CBS News Detroit.
Southeast Michigan news whenever you want it.
We're ready to go live from your community.
Anywhere, anytime.
Live streaming and on demand.
That's the name of the game.
We are ready.
CBS News Detroit, in your neighborhood. Live, streaming, and on demand.
Black history is a time to celebrate. It's a time to let all of America know exactly what we bring to the table. It is a celebration of remembering everything that we've done to contribute to this great nation. So you can talk about slavery, you can talk about post-slavery. You know, I come from sharecroppers in North Carolina. And for me to be here today is great. It's funny, in more than 40 years of this industry, I've got about maybe 6 stops I've made where I was the first African American to either do sports Monday through Friday, even part of a sports department. So being a part of that history is encouraging, because there are young people who follow in my footsteps and will do bigger and better things.
Welcome back. The College Board is introducing a first-of-its-kind course on African American studies. It is the first advanced placement, or AP, class for high school students that combines history with arts and culture. Recently, the AP African American Studies Director and Program Manager, Brandy Waters, explained what's in the class on CBS Mornings. Take a look.
This course is so exciting. It's an amazing course. It's one where students have the opportunity to delve into the depths of African American experiences. They see the diversity of these communities and the broader connections between the U.S. and the African diaspora. It's a course that allows students, as you mentioned, to explore resources in the arts and the sciences, in politics, and really come away understanding their current situation much more deeply.
Now, last month, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis rejected the pilot AP course, preventing it from being taught in Florida. Here's what he had to say about it back on January 23rd.
This course on Black history, what's one of the lessons about? Queer theory. Now, who would say that an important part of Black history is queer theory? That is somebody pushing an agenda on our kids. And so when you look to see they have stuff about intersectionality, abolishing prisons, that's a political agenda. And so that's the wrong side of the line for Florida standards. We believe in teaching kids facts and how to think, but we don't believe they should have an agenda imposed on them.
Now, once again, we are joined by Roy Finkenbine, professor of African American history at the University of Detroit Mercy. And Roy, you actually played a role in the development or review of that AP course. What do you make of the controversy that it's grown into, specifically in Florida?
Well, I was one of the consultants nationally among college professors that examined the test. This is a pilot. So they're piloting in 60 schools nationally. They're running it by high school teachers. They're running it by people like myself, college professors specializing in African American history. And so we looked at both the curriculum materials that would be used in the course, and we got to look at sample exam questions for the AP exam. And I would characterize it that the bulk of the exam was pretty standard African American history, as I would teach in my courses, with some culture and literature, art thrown in. Where the controversy came and where politicians looking for a potential target, like Governor DeSantis came in, was there were optional topics for individual projects that students could do, that teachers could allow them to do in the course, and also optional materials that teachers could include depending on the school district. And these were things like Black feminism, intersectionality, which simply sounds like a big word, but simply refers to the notion that one could be the victim of two kinds of discrimination at once. Black woman, for example, a Black gay person. Topic like queer studies or Black gay studies. And these were not in the direct curriculum, they were optional. But these were potentially toxic enough to some people that they could brand them as problematic and go after the test. Where the test as a whole, it seems to me, is pretty much in line with what was already being done in the best African American history classes. This isn't the first controversy we have seen in recent years around education and Black history's role in education. Of course, CRT, that acronym, many people know what that stands for now, critical race theory. Not as many people have a full understanding of what this theory actually is and where it is used, where it is applied. What do you make of the huge politicized issue that has become in the last couple of years? Well, it's become a slogan that I think has been misused. I mean, one of the things I known for years, and this was developed a few decades ago by a woman named professor in law school called Kimberly Crenshaw. And all it does is to seek to unpack, what are the residues of slavery, of Jim Crow, that continue in institutions. I think of this, put it in maybe another example. I can build a stairs, and maybe I have somebody who's going up the stairs with muddy boots again and again and again. And I could say, okay, no more muddy boots. There's still going to be residue left on the stairs that society has to confront. And the same thing is true of racism and discrimination. It's in institutions, even though our laws have said certain things, like the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965, you still have this residue. And a guy named Christopher Rufo, who was a conservative activist, basically found that he could make this convenient slogan to gin up fear, grievance, concern amongst people who really didn't know what CRT stood for. And CRT is only taught at the law school level. I mean, graduate education, maybe a few sociology courses at the graduate level. When people make claims, including in front of local school boards, that there is CRT being taught, if you unpack it, really what they're talking about is the inclusion of African American history, African American literature, African American art and culture, and also DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion training for teachers and staff in schools.
Why do you think that concept makes so many people so deeply uncomfortable? It must be more complicated than just outright racism, right?
Well, I think it's more complicated than outright racism. I think it's we are in a feedback loop in the era of social media and all of the algorithms, and so one can go and find self-confirming evidence if they want to, and are directed towards that self-confirming evidence. I think if people look more broadly, one of the things I like in schools now is they're just starting to teach critical thinking courses aimed at how you evaluate the things you find in social media in terms of reliability, bias, etc. And so I think that a lot of well-meaning people have got their dander up, because on the surface this seems like it may be CRT, DEI may be biased, when exactly the opposite is what they're trying to address. And like I said, I'm a firm believer, a little discomfort does your students no harm.
Let's talk about that discomfort. There have been a lot of concerns out there. People fear that to look at the history of this country with a critical eye is to place blame on people who are still walking around in this country today. It's, some people would apply that it's assigning guilt and it's demonizing white Americans specifically. Why do you believe that's a fallacy?
Well, first of all, one of the debates that we have to have is that do we bear responsibility for what our forefathers did? Or are we simply responsible for what we do now and the changes we try to bring about, and our willingness to educate ourselves fully about inequities in society, changes that may be needed, and so forth? I personally, I'm kind of in an unusual situation of being a white man, an old white man that has taught African American history, including at historically black colleges in a few cases for 40+ years. And while I don't assume blame for what my forefathers did, and I could look down to my hometown in Ohio, where as I'm learning about the indigenous history before we came, my ancestors came, I could look at the you know, the racial intolerance that existed there and so forth. I didn't do that, but how am I going to respond to what I find in society now? And I would argue that unless we unpack the good, the bad, and the ugly for our children in classes, and it's got to be at the appropriate level, and I think high school and sometimes middle school is the appropriate level. Unless we do that at the appropriate level, we are consigning ourselves to the status quo, including all of the inequities that still exist.
Yeah. Do you think part of it has to do with the privilege or discrimination aspect? Do some people believe that if you acknowledge that some are facing built-in discrimination and some have built-in privilege, that are people feeling like somehow that means I don't deserve the privileges I have if you clearly don't deserve the discrimination you're receiving? Is that the mindset, do you think?
Yeah, I think there's several things going on. One is an unwillingness of whites, you know, I fight this all the time. The unwillingness of whites to recognize the privilege that they do have in the larger society. And, you know, the same thing applies to men, to fail to recognize the privilege they may have in the larger society. And, you know, an example of that I wrote an op-ed a couple of years ago called The Talk. And if you don't know what the talk is, that's, you know, throughout African American history, first in the days of slavery and how you engage and talk to slaveholders and other white people. During the days of Jim Crow, how you talk to white people. And you know, since the Civil Rights Movement, certainly how you interact with police and people in position of authority. And black folks, black parents, for generations now have been having to give that talk, which basically consists of, you know, when you're stopped, for instance, in today's era, you're stopped by the cops, keep your hands on the wheel, don't reach for your wallet, say yes sir and no sir, you know, all of these things to try to alleviate happening to you what happened to Tyree Nichols. Or George Floyd, or any one of a number of people. And what I did is put a twist on the talk to say that white parents need to have the talk with their children. And what I mean by that is they need to be willing to talk about race. There's lots of survey data that suggests that white parents never or seldom have talks about race with their children, normalizing it, talking about what the inequities might be. And so their children go out into adulthood thinking that the status quo is just fine. It's where we should be. I have 2 adult sons, and trust me, they were not angels. But I never had to have the talk with them. That's an example of my privilege as a white man.
Yeah.
I never had to have the talk with them.
Why do you think that is a difficult concept for some people to accept? What would you say to the white American, man or woman, who says, I've had a hard life. They haven't had an easy, they weren't raised with a silver spoon in their mouths. So when you tell someone like that they are privileged, that can be a hard pill to swallow.
It is, and there are different kinds of privilege, obviously. But the fact, I think it's from the days of slavery, poor whites identified with slave owners, including the slave-owning elite, and they voted for them. Why did they do that? Because they could always say within a very racist society, well, at least I'm not black. They did the same thing during Jim Crow. And I think today that's part of it, is the fear that if we restructure society too much, I could lose that privilege. The other thing is, I think just a lot of people, because maybe they don't read as widely, they don't watch African American films, they don't read African American novels, they don't engage African American content programs, you name it, and they never have, this huge number of white Americans that never have meaningful interaction on a weekly basis with a black person. Yes, they might even work with a black person they see from a distance in their business or whatever, but I mean meaningful interaction. Right. I tell students, white students, go to a black church. Go out to eat with with a fellow black student. You know, do these kinds of things, and you'll begin to get an awareness that you don't have. And so I think a lot of people don't see it, others run from it.
Yeah. Well, that awareness, that education can only be a positive thing for all of us going forward. Dr. Roy Finkenbine, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. We hope